Particularly popular, even though it's true. And the social psychologists have actually been driven to admit that in the last 3 or 4 years. And I would say the latest manifestation of the corruption in that field is that damned implicit association test that everybody and their dog is using to indicate that A, you're an unconscious bigot whether you know it or not, and B, that gives us the right to muck about with the substructure of your psyche. And that's happening everywhere. Unconscious bias retraining. Here's a piece of advice. I don't know how many of you have careers where this sort of thing is seeping in, but you do not submit to unconscious bias retraining. A, you admit that you're a racist. B, you indicate by your accession, by your agreement, that the people who are re-educating you have that right, which they don't. C, you admit that their training programs work, which they don't. There's no evidence whatsoever that those training programs work. So first of all, your unconscious bias is not well understood. We don't know how to distinguish it from in-group preference. Now you think, well, you shouldn't have an in-group preference. It's like, oh, really? Really? Is that right? So you're not supposed to, love your family, for example. So, you can't love everyone equally. Maybe God can do that, but you can't. You can probably hardly even love one person properly. So, trying to extend that to all of humanity, well, first of all, you're just not there. Let's put it that way. So that's the first thing and we can't distinguish stereotypes from classification, perceptual classification. We don't know how to do that. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is the implicit association test does not meet standards for validity and reliability that would allow it to be used as a diagnostic test. So it's actually intellectual fraud. If a clinician did that, they would be drummed out of, they would be violating their responsibility as clinical psychologists. Because they're social psychologists, they can get away with it. It's like the implicit association test. There's a very, very small correlation between what the implicit association test measures and your actual behaviors. That's the hallmark of validity. And you have to have a high correlation before you can use a test as a diagnostic instrument. You can't use IAT results in court. Why? Because they're not valid. And they're also not reliable, which means that, let's say I assess your implicit biases and then I do it again next month and then I do it again in a year. There's not a lot of similarity between the first measurement and the second measurement and the third measurement. And that means that it's extraordinarily variable. And that's not, IQ isn't like that. If I measure your IQ today and then next week and then next month, it's the same. It's seriously the same, whereas your implicit biases are bouncing all over the place. And so to use that test to justify the idea that everyone's an unconscious racist in some manner that's so important that it actually determines hiring decisions, for example, and important elements of behavior, is scientific fraud of the highest sort. And then to multiply that fraud by the claim that you can take people and run them through some idiot HR exercise run by people who have no competence whatsoever and zero psychological understanding and no scientific training and nothing but political ideological possession, and that's going to make you a better person is seriously wrong. And so we've just got to stop doing that. And when people, so that's one thing I would recommend is if your companies, first of all, if you run companies, do not fall for this. It's fraud of the lowest sort. And if you're an employee, it's no, you don't let your employer retrain your unconscious biases. That's a place to draw the line. And when someone does that to you and suggests that it's necessary, they are not your friend. And if you don't stand up to them now, then you'll wait 5 years and there's going to be a lot more of them and a lot less of you. So it's not going to get any better. So that's just got to be... I emailed Mazarin Banaji, for example, who's one of the creators of the IAT, and said, why the hell don't you come out in public and make a declaration? You know perfectly well that this test is being misused. You know it. You know it. You won't come out and say, hey guys, you really can't